So let's go ahead and start with you, James.
Okay. So my name is James Dawsey. I'm a publisher and writer and designer. I've worked with Green Ronin on a number of projects. I'm currently working for them as an art director on the Sentinels of Earth Prime card game. I've also done a lot of writing for them. Well, not a lot, but I've done some writing for them on their Mutants and Masterminds line. Under my company, Vigilance Press, which I bought from the creator Chuck Rice a few years back, I published a number of superhero role-playing games, and probably most familiar to most people, we published the Fate Core-based Kung Fu role-playing game, Tianxia, Blood, Silk, and Jade, which we are currently working on a new rulebook for, which we hope to run a Kickstarter for either later this year or early next year.
I've played that. It's good.
Oh, thank you. Cool.
All right.
Which you played Tianxia with me?
No, at a convention in Florida.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Who ran it?
Some random dude at the con. I had free time and it looked interesting. So.
Fantastic. Okay.
All right, Jeff, you want to? Oh, actually, real quick, James.
Yes.
You also used to do artwork as well, right?
I am an artist, although I'm not currently a professional artist. There is some of my artwork in some of the early products that we did for Vigilance Press, or that I did for Vigilance Press. But
okay,
I've stepped aside to basically, it's just not time efficient for me to do art for my own stuff.
Understandable, but I figure that's one of the things you used to anime cons as an artist, as I remember you mentioning.
Yes, a lot of my convention stories are going to be when I was an artist. In the
okay, that's cool.
So.
That's actually one of the. That's an aspect I wanted to cover, so we'll cover. All right,
yes, sir.
Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Jeff Jones. I go by the handle White Buddha. I have not been involved in the industry for a number of years, except as a fan. But back in the day, I used to work for FASA, and I helped write the Gencan't tournament modules back when they first started out from 94 to 98. I also did some work in some of the second edition books, uncredited, doing character statting, because no one wanted to do it.
It's always a nightmare.
I've been working for a corps since then as a defense contractor, and just moved to the Northeast to get a little karma back and work in public health.
Yeah, and you GM'd for quite a while, including a number of years for me when I was running things.
I did. One of the things that you had to do when you were writing the convention tournament was run them. So we were always there running the teams through the various different convention things that were pretty interesting.
Yeah, Jeff was actually my GM for the third round of the Shadowrun tournament, my very first Gen Con. A million years ago.
And he was totally open to bribing the GM.
I was totally open to bribing GM. However, I was also mostly unconscious because I hadn't learned time management at a convention, because it was my first large convention, and holy crap was I tired. Yeah, Saturday night at a convention is you're wiped out under normal circumstances, and this being my first convention, I spent the entire weekend running around going, what's this? So by Saturday, I just sort of fell over. Okay. Darcy.
Hi, finally got my nickname sorted. Darcy Stratton, call sign Kiroshi, and I'm as old as Jeff. Jeff was my GM too.
God.
So ages ago, minus another 3 years, because I think I started before. Actually, was it Jeff? Was it you or was it Rich that was arguing with me one year about what events were happening plot-wise in my first Gen Con, forgetting that no, I wasn't there for the first Shadowrun tournament ever.
Oh,
I was there for the second Shadowrun tournament ever. Was my first Gen Con. So, and yeah, when you write it, they make you run it, but also if you win the tournament too many times, they say you're done playing. You need to start running it. So.
That was
when
that was how I recruited half of my GMs.
that was how I got recruited myself. So
The fix is in.
that is it. You win the tournament. You're easy peasy, right? A few years in a row.
You got to give
So
somebody
easy.
else a chance.
And then they'll invite you, quote, invite you to start running it. So yes, to give other people a chance, which was fun. And then there were a number of us that got recruited. Not all of them stayed. I was the crazy one. And so let's say that was in like '94 or
Yep.
so. Yeah. And so I played and then was running it, and I helped write it 1 or 2 years, but not taking the lead on it. Until around 2006 or 7 or so, and then life circumstances started keeping me away from Gencan't. So,
All right, and
Origins and Nathan, as we mentioned earlier.
and Rat, I know you were here last night, so a lot of our audience probably met you virtually yesterday. But why don't you go ahead and give us a quick, who are you?
I'm RL King, aka Rat. Jeff was not my GM. I don't think I know Jeff, but I am also old. So, I to tell you how old I bought Shadowrun originally at a tiny convention that I attended in 1989. So I've been going to various conventions for a while, including San Diego Comic-Con, Gencan't, Origins, and some other stuff. Yeah, everybody already met me last night, so that's really about it.
Alrighty. Rat also it does writing. She's got her.
I forgot to mention.
Yeah, go ahead and mention that you're a writer.
I'm a writer. Yeah, I have done some fiction and freelance work for Shadowrun over the years, and I also write my own. excuse me. My own urban fantasy series, the Alistair Stone Chronicles.
For James and Rat both, if you guys want to post a link to your websites, go ahead and pimp your stuff. So if anybody's interested, they can go check it out. I recommend both. I love Rat's her fiction. Her the Stone Chronicles are fantastic, and I can never pronounce it, but Tianxia.
It's technically Tianxia, but most people will say it Tianxia because they're kind of used to seeing the XIA with an SH sound, and I've been taught that that's incorrect. But at the same time, we don't really. The whole concept of Tianxia is that we want to make a kind of Chinese wuxia kung fu stuff accessible to a Western audience. So I'm not going to go around policing how people pronounce things. It's well, I mean, on the one hand, it's not good business, but on the other hand, it's really not the point. The point is to try and bring people into the world of Tianxia to actually feel, make people feel comfortable telling stories in that genre and that motif that we've got there, which is kind of a distillation of kung fu and wuxia movies.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun. I've not, unfortunately, had a chance to play it because I don't get to actually game very often anymore. But maybe some year I'll get a chance. Maybe if I can pin James down at Origins next year, I can make him run a game for me.
I'd love to, man.
All right.
I mean, what I really need to do is do some Tianxia like actual plays online so that people can hear us play the way we did actual plays of Mutants and Masterminds a few years back. So we haven't done the podcast in a while, but I've been trying to get that. But people have been so busy; it's really hard to nail down a schedule these days.
Yeah, that would be really cool. So you should. All right.
Anytime you want to play, just bring me up.
Will do. All right. I know Rat might have to. Said she's got to take off a little early, so I'm going to kick things off with her a little bit. Generally speaking, if anybody out there has never actually been to a convention, there's a lot of different types of conventions and a lot of different sizes of convention. You get everything from these little tiny local conventions that get 50 to 100 people or even less. Some mid-sized conventions that'll get a few hundred people to a couple of thousand, and then you get large-scale conventions like Origins, Gencan't, San Diego Comic-Con, where you get 30, 50. Gencan't I think has broken 80,000. San Diego's what, 150,000 plus? It's freaking
130, but I could be wrong.
it's a ridiculous amount of people. That's all I know. So you get these really, really massively huge conventions. So they run the gambit of things, and each convention has a tendency to focus on different areas and different aspects. Rat's done both BlizzCon and San Diego Con, which I don't think any of the rest of us have really ever gotten a chance to do. So I figured I'd have her talk about those a little bit. So let's start with BlizzCon.
Okay.
Tell us for anybody who doesn't know what BlizzCon is. Tell us what it was or is, because it still goes. They still hold them, right?
Have them every year, but I've been to a couple of them in the late 2000s. I think I went in 2007 and 2008.
Mm-hmm.
It's a con that's put on by Blizzard, and it's exclusively for Blizzard products, which World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Hearthstone. I wasn't there when Overwatch wasn't a thing when I was there, but I'm sure it's going to be huge at BlizzCon now. It's pretty big. I don't know how many people are there, but it seems like a really large convention. They don't tend to do as much, they don't have as big of a dealer's room, obviously, because they're just people selling stuff for Blizzard products. They do a lot of, the World StarCraft International thing is there. They have a lot of. They do product announcements. Obviously, they do the big cinematics for the new games that are coming out. They always announce the new World of Warcraft expansion. Generally, I only paid attention to World of Warcraft, so I don't really know that much about what's going on with the other stuff. But I'm sure they have big announcements for those as well.
So what all do you do there besides just go and watch the announcements and stuff? I mean, what did you do all day while you were at the convention?
They had exhibits. They had, the dealer's room was reasonably sized, so you could do a fair bit of shopping. They had a lot of, they had an enormous, I didn't do this, but they had tons of computers set up where people could go and try out the new games and the new betas, and let's see, what else did they have? It seemed mostly like it was a huge convention because it was in a relatively small venue compared to some of the other ones. So there were lots of lines and lots of crowds, but on a smaller scale than something like Gencan't.
Right. Yeah, because that's always what I always wonder about conventions. Because my experience has all been gaming conventions, where at a gaming convention you spend the bulk of your time at the larger ones. There's the dealer hall, which you can spend an entire day exploring. But when you're not doing that, you're either hanging out with friends or gaming, which is what most people do, which is why people go. So that's
one
all.
Of the things that was kind of curious for just to jump in here real quick, that you were talking about how conventions have changed. I've been going to conventions since 1995, specifically anime conventions, and there was a huge change in both the attendance and kind of the purpose of the conventions over the past couple of decades. So it's kind of interesting to watch that. I can talk about that later once.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I can definitely see how some of the anime conventions would have changed, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so for me, it's always a question of what do you do all day, and that's where I always wonder.
Things I forgot to mention too. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of things I forgot to mention that they also do at BlizzCon. They have an enormous costume contest.
Right, yeah, that's what I always see a lot of pictures for.
People put together some absolutely gorgeous costumes.
Oh, yeah.
One of the years I was there, they had a guy that dressed up like Illidan, who is one of the big deals in World of Warcraft.
Oh, yeah.
And he had the full wings. He had the hooves. I mean, he was 7 feet tall. It was amazing. Those costumes are just beautiful. And the night they have the costume contest, they also have a dance contest, which is all the characters in World of Warcraft have a signature dance for their race, like the orcs have one and the blood elves have one and whatnot. So they get people up there dressed as various characters doing the dance, and then the audience votes on who the winners are.
That's awesome.
And they almost always have a big band there. One year they had Ozzy Osbourne. One year they had Tenacious D. They usually try to get some relatively big name kind of nerd adjacent band. I'm not sure exactly how Ozzy Osbourne is nerd adjacent. But
well, most nerds like Ozzy.
I liked Ozzy. He put on a good show. The thing they do, and they also have people get together with their guilds. That's another big deal for BlizzCon, is people show up with their guilds, and since they're all over the country or sometimes all over the world, they get together and meet up in person and do whatever, go out and eat, or sit around, talk, whatever. So that's pretty cool too.
Awesome. So what about San Diego Comic-Con? Because that's like the big granddaddy of conventions. That is the monster at this point. Even though from what I've heard, it doesn't really resemble most of the other comic conventions too much anymore.
Oh, San Diego Comic-Con has really kind of gotten to be more of a pop culture media convention than a comic convention. In fact, a lot of the comic dealers are pulling out because they can't afford it because it's so expensive to sell there. But yeah, it's a great place to go if you want to spend 4 days in the company of 130,000 of your closest friends. It always amuses me when people talk about how big Gencan't is, and I'm kind of I can't help but kind of smile and say, yeah, that's cute. Admittedly, it's gotten bigger now. It's much bigger than I remember it the first few times. But compared to Comic-Con is like, the dealer's room is like the size of a football field. It's like completely choked with people up and down every single row. It's kind of amazing, really.
Yeah, Comic-Con's one of their big things is exclusives. So you get a lot of these companies and toy manufacturers and whatever that show up, and they have items that are only available for that convention.
Sign up for them. They give out wristbands. They, like if you want to line up for something, you can get a wristband the previous day that gives you the chance to line up the next day to possibly get the thing. And if you like standing in lines, you'll love Comic-Con because you do a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing about Comic-Con that always kind of made me kind of go, I don't know. Is you hear about, it's like, because panels are like one of the big things to do there besides shop. Is go to the panels and see the, for your favorite TV show or movie or whatever, the comic companies.
That's the cool thing about Comic-Con, is that they get so many big stars. Like, they get the entire cast of Doctor Who. They get, the major shows that are that are going to be TV shows or movies. They'll get, a significant number of the people from the cast. And Marvel doesn't really do it much anymore because I think they've moved over to the Disney Con.
No, yeah, D23 or whatever.
But anything that's announcing, like, DC or the major nerd TV shows or whatever, will have a presence there, and you can see the people. Sometimes you can even meet them if you're willing to wait in long lines again, like. Or aside from the big names that you will have a lot of more trouble getting near, you'll also have a lot of the major comic artists will be there. A lot of the kind of more second tier nerd people that will be there for autographs, and you can sign up and get an autograph from the people from your favorite show like 20 years ago that you might not have ever gotten a chance to see before. I was able to. I don't do a lot of lines, so I didn't sign up for a lot of it. But I was able to meet Burke Brethid, who does the comic strip Bloom County, and get his autograph. And I met Chuck Tingle this year, which was kind of fun. He didn't have a line.
Yeah, he's a very niche audience to hit there.
But yeah, if you want to meet your comic book artist idols, chances are you can just kind of, they'll have a table in the dealer's room, and you can just kind of walk up and say hey, and and it's pretty neat to be able to do that. So, same with some authors are there. Whether
Now-
they have something out this year or not, whether they're there, but
Now you always I hear a lot about how long the lines and how about people standing in line for like hours and hours. Is
days.
that true for everything, or is that just like the really really big what is it, Hall H or whatever?
H, yeah, that's the one that people actually literally sleep out on the street. Yeah, and that is true. They do that. But I heard that they went to a wristband model this year. I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but somebody told me that. But for most of the stuff, what's kind of annoying about it is they have panels all day in the various panel rooms, and they don't clear them in between. So if you want to go, like last year, I wanted to go. Lucifer is one of my favorite shows, and they were going to have a panel for Lucifer, but it was going to be at like 2:00 in the afternoon. So I showed up when they opened at 10 o'clock, and there was already an enormous line. And I literally sat in that, I sat through like 5 panels that I cared nothing about, just so I could be there for the Lucifer panel.
To make sure you had a seat.
Exactly.
Oh,
So people
man.
will do that, which I guess they kind of have to do it because they get so many people in those halls that they can't. It's not really feasible to be shuttling people in and out.
Yeah.
But Qatar, no, I don't have a table at. Well, I do I had one at Silicon Valley Comic-Con last year, which was a smaller thing, but no, not for Comic-Con. It's very expensive. It's very hard to get in, and I don't have really enough stuff to sell there that I think it would be worthwhile to do it.
It might be worth trying to do it again at Origins or Gencan't next year, though.
Thinking about maybe doing it at Origins. I didn't do the library this year, which is where I had the table the year before. But maybe I'll try to get a table this year. We'll see.
That'd be
Might
cool.
be fun.
All right. So real quick, does anybody have any questions about BlizzCon or Comic-Con while we still have Rat? Give them a second. So yeah, I just can't imagine. Like I've done Gen Con a number of years, and Gen Con's pretty good size. But Gen Con also isn't as crowded as something like that is because, at least half of the gamers at any given point are sitting at a table in a room somewhere.
So I could toss Rod a question if we're waiting for a question for her.
Sure.
So as an author, how important to you are conventions for your networking, for business networking?
Gaming conventions, not really. The only reason, I go to Origins every year, primarily, not primarily, but definitely my editor, John Hilfers, is always there because he is also the fiction editor for Shadowrun. And so we always get together and have dinner and discuss kind of the plans for the series over the next year. So that counts as networking. But and like I said, I did do the library, which is kind of the Origins authors program last year. So that was nice to be able to, just get out there and meet some people and sell some books. But as far as networking, I'm not really a very good networker. I'll be honest. I'm an introvert. I don't kind of get out there and really say, "Hey, look at me." So my networking is largely done online, to be honest. I know other people who really get a lot out of the networking at conventions, but sadly, I'm not really one of them.
Okay.
The only reason she's here doing this panel is because I kept pestering her.
That's not true. This is
no,
fun.
I know. So all right. So we've got a Comic-Con. So have you guys done any of the smaller Comic-Cons? Some of the mid-sized ones, like what was it, Chicago? I think Jeff mentioned New York Comic-Con.
Yeah, I've done New York and LA and
How big are
Mexico
those?
and, Florida.
How big are those? Give or take.
It's weird. They're not big. 10, 15,000, maybe 20,000, depending. But it's really hard to tell because they're usually in everybody's in one giant room. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of side stuff. They don't have stuff in hotels and that sort of thing. So New York Comic Con, I'm sure there was more than that, but it didn't. If it was packed, but it didn't feel like a big con.
Yeah, I've done. I want to say I think it's now like Ohio Comic Con or something like that, but it used to be like Mid Ohio Con years ago that I've gone to a couple of times over the years. And the first year I went, it was pretty small, and it was just in a like a ballroom in a local hotel, so probably only a few thousand people at most. And then the last time I went was I guess it's been about 8 years now, but it was at the convention center in Columbus. And it was a bit bigger. Still not real big. It was really weird seeing... Because I'm used to Origins, and it was really weird seeing that same space with that few people. And in fact, there was even, like, one of the other exhibit halls in the same convention center was being used for a cheerleading competition the same weekend. Which was also weird, because you had a bunch of cheerleaders walking around, and then you had all these comic geeks walking around, and it was just kind of a funny mix. But
Chicago's Comic. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Chicago's Comic Con ended up turning into C2E2, which to me seems it's a lot like San Diego in that there's TV and movie people there. They've now taken over 2 floors of the big convention center downtown Chicago. So that's
yeah,
kind of odd.
Yeah, I know C2E2 is supposed to be pretty good size now.
Yeah. But then part of that, it's no longer just a Comic-Con. It's
right.
The E Entertainment Expo. So you've got John Barrowman and Aisha Tyler, all those from all the geek TV shows and everything.
Yeah, I'm not sure I think it's hit the point where the Comic-Cons can't sustain them. Well, they can't sustain themselves on the old model of just being comic conventions. So a lot of them have branched out into doing the multimedia or the media stuff.
I'm not sure that's a matter of cans. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you've also got a lot of comics on television now, thanks to DC.
Well, yeah.
So there's bleed through in both directions now. So
this is true as well. Plus the movies and stuff are. Mm-hmm. Oh, stop posting pictures from Gencan't. You're making me very, very sad.
I went to C2E2 a couple of years ago. I think it was the year that Chris Hemsworth first showed up, and as I recall, there was a minor controversy because of how much they were charging for the tickets to get into the panel to see him. I seem to remember one of the attendees who got up to the microphone to ask him a question, asked if a piggyback ride came with the price of the ticket. But it is a new revenue stream for a lot of these actors, and it's as long as the people are there for these kind of media celebrities and willing to pay those prices for their attendance, the concept of the comic book convention as a comic book only kind of concept is going to have to change. There's just no need. There's just too much money to be made with these other kind of media celebrities, and unfortunately, the days of John Byrne commanding that kind of attendance at a convention compared to the other people there it's just not the same thing anymore. No.
Well, I think part of that too was that specifically the comic audience has it's recovered a little bit, but it's dwindled from where it was like in the 80s and early 90s.
It's also morphing. A lot of comic books that are successful through other distribution streams are changing the model of how people read comics. So comic book conventions, largely kind of bank on the assumption that most people are there to see people from the big two, DC or Marvel. But online, you see a lot of people in comic books successfully, marketing themselves in independent methods. Being able to direct sell to the audience, being able to, put up their comics for free online and then do a Kickstarter for a collection,
right.
Things like that. There's a lot of growth in the independent industry, which kind of changes who is reading comics and why they're reading comics, which is
Very
also
true.
an interesting thing to follow.
Qatar has a point as well, I think, too, is that with the internet, you don't necessarily need the cons to find new comics, and I think it's even more than that. You don't need the conventions to be able to interact with some of the creators and authors and artists, because with Twitter and various forums and Facebook and whatever, there is a way to reach out and talk to. And granted, not a lot of them necessarily have the time to respond or anything. You're not going to get a one-on-one all the time, but.
Or should you?
But I mean, it used to be that, if you wanted to find out about your favorite artist, the only way to really do it was either find a magazine that had an interview or go to a convention where they were a guest.
Yeah, I think that actually that sort of, a lot of people have sort of morphed their internet celebrity status into actual, and I'm not saying that these people aren't also good writers, good artists, things like that, but a lot of people sort of made their first impact on comics as critics or as, fan artists and things like that, got attention that way on the internet and are now professional comic book professionals.
Yeah.
So it's they've sort of parlayed their internet notoriety into sort of a fan base that then supports them in comics. I think it's like Gail Simone, for example, began as an outspoken critic of certain problems in comic books, and now she's a writer who has had 2 decades now at least of history in comics. I mean, she's
like that.
She's fantastic, and she's got this great Twitter presence, this personality that people she's memorable and approachable and funny on Twitter, but at the same time, she's this excellent writer with a huge resume of characters that just go everything from horror to humor. She's written it, and that's somebody who's willfully engaged with the community kind of first, and then segued over into actually being a production person.
So yeah. Real quick, also, while I've got Rat here still, I wanted to ask a question of Rat and Karoshi, if that's fine with Darcy. This one's a little touchy, so I don't blame you if you don't want to talk anything about it. And I apologize. But one of the big things with conventions, and this is kind of a general blanket convention thing, there's been a lot of attention put on appropriate behavior at convention, and how, unfortunately, there is a subsection of gamers and fans and convention goers that are, shall we say, creeps. Have you guys ever experienced anything like that, and how do you deal with it if you have?
I'm laughing because who goes first? I've had friends who have. I think a lot of that goes towards cosplayers that I have observed. One way or another, I guess I've shielded myself from that, because when I was going to the conventions regularly, I was dressing in the standard geek uniform of the long black t-shirt and leggings and Converse high tops, and so I wasn't dressing to get attention. I was one of a sea of masses of people, but I have had people creep on me in the past. Generally, what I've not as overtly, not as attention making or anything that I'd want to report on anybody. I've seen accounts of that kind of behavior since then. It didn't take long going to the conventions that I built up a network of friends, male and female, between like Bull, Jeff, Rich, Granite, everybody, Neil, just names from the dim and distant past. They would all look out for me. Not that I needed looking out for. Vicky, I'd name another woman in there. But to know that there's always somebody that I knew that was sort of near, that if I had a problem, not that was at the front of my mind, but never forgetting the fact that I was in a city for these conventions, and to know that, okay, where is the safe space? Oh, there's a person there that I know I can go to.
It sucks that that's even got to be a concern, really.
Well, in a lot of ways, that's a concern for women everywhere, not just at conventions.
Well, agreed.
When you're out in public, is fine,
And again,
somewhere in the back of your mind.
And again, it sucks. I wish it. Well, especially because I expect better out of geeks because geeks have been traditionally so marginalized themselves. You know, you get a lot of the gamers, a lot of the nerd culture is, they've been the marginalized guys. So you would expect them to be better, and so I think that almost makes it, to me at least personally, it makes it almost more disappointing when I find out somebody isn't better. You know, it's extra disappointing because you would think, like, come on, you should know better. But yeah, so yeah, it just kind of sucks.
I think a lot of the problem with people thinking about themselves as the marginalized group is that they have a tendency to, kind of wear victimhood as a badge and kind of blend in with people they normally wouldn't, necessarily associate with. And it's also a tendency to draw in people who are socially awkward and put them in a large group of people, in a large group of people in one place, and they start following bad examples. So it's there's kind of a lot of things at play there that can exacerbate problems that would exist in any large group of people, like a sporting gathering, sporting event, concerts, things like that. But when you're specifically targeting people who, think of themselves as socially marginalized, then you sort of are throwing a magnifying glass on some odd social, incongruities that can be magnified and exacerbated. It's just so it's like any large event. People need to kind of be aware of who they're with and what's going on around them. But at the same time, it's kind of that, but mostly people who kind of see themselves as nerds. And I think that's actually, as much of a problem. It's more of a problem than it is actually a kind of a defense of people who are out there being creeps. It's essentially kind of gives them a position of well, he just doesn't know better. They kind of throw, can make that excuse. And it's like there's no real excuse for that behavior. It's you treat people with respect no matter where you are, no matter who you're with. And
you would think
if you remember that women are people, you'll be a lot better off.
Wait. You're saying that women are people?
Yeah.
No. Shit. I tell you what, I'm afraid of most of the women I know. They would kick my ass. Rat and Darcy especially.
One of my editors is currently studying Systema, so I'm right there with you.
Anat13 was saying that she was talking about cosplay a little bit, and yeah, it's not just cosplay, because I know a friend of mine was a roommate with me for a little while, and her daughter, her first origin, she was about 16, and she went wandering around by herself for a little while, and then she comes back a bit later, and apparently there was a dude that had just started following her up and down the hall for about half an hour, just everywhere she went, and she finally came back to the room with us, and it's like, and of course then, she comes wandering in, and there's me, and I'm a big dude, and there was my friend Steve Tanner, who is a big dude, and a bunch of other Shadowrun GMs that she comes over with, and I saw, I don't know if it was the same guy, but I saw some guy kind of peek in, and then he kind of just scurried away really quick. But I just don't understand it myself, but
it's kind of weird. I never thought of myself as a big dude until I started going to conventions. I'm about 6'1", but I'm kind of, I'm not particularly intimidating, I guess. But a lot of girls, I think, kind of peg me as one of those safe guys, and so like in a crowd, I suddenly become like, just standing near me seems to be a safe place for some people. So I seem to get a lot more kind of attention, or at least I historically did at conventions when people kind of got the word that, oh yeah, he's cool, you can hang out around him if you're not feeling safe. And so I've kind of helped, be a smokescreen for certain women
Yeah.
when they weren't feeling comfortable around another person or a circumstance.
Yeah, I hope I try to be somebody that my female friends can rely on, and I always tell them that if they ever have any problems, come to me. So hopefully they feel comfortable doing that.
And that's actually what Annette 13 was talking about. That it's not just cosplay. That we need more of the guys to speak up against that behavior. I brought up there's the analogy of a missing stair. Like you have a staircase that has one wobbly board, and you get so used to walking around the board and ignoring the problem instead of confronting it and saying, okay, yeah, oh, that's just that guy being that guy. You ignore it. Well, no, he's the one creeping on me. I'm not going to ignore it. And so it needs to be other people that step in and say, hey, that's not right.
Yeah, you get, especially when you get a lot of when you get groups that are all guys and stuff, especially, it's really, to use a terrible fucking phrase, but that concept of locker room talk. It's just something that's kind of accepted among guys for whatever reason, and it's bullshit. It's disgusting and it's bullshit, but it just is. And unfortunately, that carries over even into gaming groups, because there are a lot of gaming groups that are mostly guys or all guys. I will say this though. I will say this in the convention, in the defense of the conventions I've been going to, at least. I know Gencan't and Origins both. They have both stepped up their anti-harassment policies big time over the last few years. And I know a lot more people are aware of it, so it's something that gets looked out for more by the average convention goer, fortunately. I've been lucky and I've never really personally seen anything overt. Like I said, outside of my friend Abby, the 16-year-old, other than the one time she had the dude following it, and it's entirely possible that he wasn't creeping on her and he just happened to be walking up and down, but who knows? Maybe he was just trying to work up the nerve to actually just talk to her because he was too shy. I don't know, and I'm not going to make excuses for him, because, either way, it was something she wasn't comfortable with. So her
One
coming...
of the things that I've seen over the years at anime conventions, and comic book conventions, but I think it's still around. It's just part of a younger culture that I don't hang out with anymore. Is kind of the perception that conventions are a good place to hook up. And so a lot of guys go to conventions kind of with this attitude of, they're constantly looking for a hookup, to find a girl to spend the night with. And, if you don't have respect for other people and you're just kind of out there, prowling, then you're a definite problem. You have to respect the fact that a lot of women are there for business, or they're there because they're part of the fandom, or they're there because they want to be a cosplayer, or they want to watch the cosplay. It's like there are any number of reasons other than being there for you that women go to conventions, and they have every right to that space because they paid for their ticket the same way somebody else did. So we need to respect their, we need to respect them. We need to treat them as people. We need to treat them the way we would want to be treated. If somebody says, look, I'm not interested in talking to you, just leave them alone. Don't take it personally. Just walk away. Find something else to do. There's Dragon Con, there's 80,000 people. There's someone else for you to talk to.
Yeah. Having friends helps a little bit. And knowing where you can go if there are any problems. And Ira, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right there. I know that you said that you would get kicked out if somebody tried anything. That I don't think is the case anymore. It might have been once upon a time, but like I said, there's especially like these days with the Me Too movement and everything like that, there's a lot more understanding of what's going on. So I think that, if something did happen and you reacted strongly, which personally I think you should, frankly, if I ever saw somebody outright harassing a friend of mine, I'd probably just punch him. I would not be nice about it, because that shit's just not fucking cool. But it might be one of those things where the convention's going to take you aside and talk to you and find out what happened. But the conventions are a lot more believing overall of this sort of thing.
To be more constructive, I think it is more constructive over the long term to actually report them to convention staff and get their badge pulled. because not only is that going to, hopefully solve the problem in the short run, it's also hopefully if somebody gets complaints levied against them and they have to get their badge pulled and kicked out of the convention, the convention should keep records on those people so they can't get tickets next year. So you want to try and create, it's like if you go and like violently assault somebody, that's not good. That's more likely to get you kicked out.
Yeah, it's not the best way to handle things.
No, it's you want to target the problem, and you want to make sure that the convention staff know who the problem is.
But that said, I will still punch them. But that's because
you don't even have to be the person to be creeped on to report something. You can say that you observed something.
And actually, that happened at Origins this year.
I've done that.
That actually kind of happened at Origins. There was a guy who was he was an exhibitor who apparently after hours was I'm not going to repeat it, but it was there's a part of me that found it really funny, his pickup line, because it was so terrible. But he was basically going around to women asking if they wanted to playtest his genitals, we'll say. Which is just fucking disgusting. But, social media kind of blew up with that. Everybody, they got reported by a bunch of people, and he, let's just...
Micro games, love it, right?
Nice.
But, it blew up, and I don't know that guy's going to be back next year. And if he is, if he is there, because he had a booth, and if he is there and his booth is there, I fully intend to say something, because that's just fucking not cool. But he was reported to the convention, and I know that they were looking into the matter. So,
speaking as somebody who's run conventions before and done that, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing. If there's witnesses, if it's cut and dried, that's easy. But if it's not, it can be very difficult. There'd be a lot of pressure from both sides. So it's never an easy decision. It's gotten easier as the public presentation of it and the public awareness of it has grown. But it can be challenging, especially if it's somebody who's a guest or a vendor or a sponsor or something like that.
Yeah.
I worked one of the anime convention that had Nicholas Brendan, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of his antics, but
I've heard, unfortunately.
Yeah, it can be very hard. It can be very hard to take that step, but it's important that that conventions do it and they step up.
But yeah, anyways, say something, report people. And the other thing is like I said, I recommend that everybody come to conventions. Gencan't is fantastic. I think every gamer should go to Gencan't at least once. As I like to say, make the pilgrimage to Mecca. And it's just almost a shame that that it's not still at the Mecca Center in Milwaukee, because that was just too perfect. Mm-hmm. But and especially if you are part of the Shadowrun circle. You let the Shadowrun guys know. You let the Catalyst demo team guys know you're going, and you will have a wall of people that will protect you all weekend long. So, and if I'm there, I am available. I will, if I'm at a table, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. If you're having a problem, come find me. I will come help you. Period. But I think let's move away from this, because that's unfortunately I
wasn't.
Oh, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if this was going to convention horror stories episode.
Yeah, I want to move away from that a little bit, but I did want to touch on that because I know it is an issue, and I wanted to get some opinions from everybody.
Yeah, I think the main thing to talk about with kind of what's going on with conventions is to actually, if you haven't been to a convention before, look for a convention with a really good harassment policy. Kind of do your research about, controversies that might come up with a particular convention. And if you're clued in with a nerd kind of whisper network, make use of that. Ask them, find out what's a safe convention to go to? What's a convention where the people running it are solid, responsible, particularly conventions that have women running them and things like that. So look for those kind of, do your research and, just kind of practice safe behaviors while you're there. Not necessarily because it's your responsibility, but because you do want to be safe.
All right. So next thing we'll touch on is I think most of you have run events at conventions, run games and such.
Yes.
What is that like? Let's start down with Jeff, because I know he's probably the.
Don't say senior. Don't say.
Senior. I was gonna say oldest, but not. I don't mean that age-wise. I mean you've been there the longest. Rat, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Bye,
Thanks
Rat.
for having me.
Yep. You have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good to see you again.
Good night, Rat.
You're on the book of face.
No, I don't mean Jeff as in the physically oldest, but you've been doing. I think you've been doing conventions the longest out of any of us here, as far as GMing.
Probably yes, since the mid '80s.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what that's like?
It's nerve-wracking. It's running a game you're familiar with to a bunch of people that you've never seen before until 5 minutes before they show up, unless it's somebody who keeps winning the Shadowrun tournament and showing up. But yeah, it's running a game for people who have no idea what their personalities are, what type of game they like, what kind of things they're interested in, what kind of character they're gonna play, no matter what. Whether you've got pre-gen characters or they brought their own, you have no idea how they're going to play that. So you have to be very adaptive. You have to be able to kind of roll with things, and time management is critical because you generally have a 4-hour window to do it all in, and you never want to leave them disappointed by not finishing.
James.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I find really fun about running games at conventions is kind of that unpredictability, but it's also my kind of convention gaming experience has become kind of a distilled thing where I tend to run a game that I've run before, and I have identified the variables so that I can kind of roll with any changes and make sure I hit that window, make sure we kind of hit the climax of the story at the right point, and I can edit the story on the fly. But it's, that's just a matter of practice. I think one of the interesting things, the fun things about conventions is getting to meet different kinds of gamers and remind yourself that your gaming group, whatever that is at home, is not necessarily indicative of every gaming group out there or even the average gaming group out there.
So true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had people from like age 10 up in my games at conventions, and that would never happen at home, because I'm in my 40s. Me hanging out with kids. I don't have kids of my own, so me hanging out with kids is probably not a good look. But unless it's their parents are also in the gaming group, that's a different story. But it's just a matter of these kinds of things don't generally, you get opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily you get, in your home gaming group and in your own, social circles, which, if you're going to run at conventions, take those opportunities, and be welcoming to people that you wouldn't necessarily have thought to game with before. Be eager to teach, if you're eager to teach new people to love the thing you love, then look for those opportunities and make the most of them. I mean, if you've never gamed with somebody who for whom English is a second language, learn to be patient and learn to teach the language at the same time as you're teaching the gaming rules, because gaming has its own dialect, our own terms. When you say DM or GM, the person who's never played before doesn't know what that means. They might think you're talking about like a direct message on Twitter or something. So you want to teach people at all levels. So that's kind of the fun thing for me is getting to meet people, especially who have not gamed before, and try to find that door that's going to open, and find that door that's going to be for them, that'll open that world for them, and find out how to teach them to enjoy the hobby that I've been playing since the 1970s.
Yeah, there is a lot of terminology that we throw around, and it's really easy to forget that not everybody knows that terminology. You tell somebody, okay, roll 46, and they're going to be like, what?
Well, even
you said 40?
Sure.
I don't have that many dice.
So then you obviously aren't playing Shadowrun.
Or Champions.
Sorry, Jeff. Go ahead.
That's okay. Even in shared worlds, though, it's funny how people branch them out and change. I'll tell you a little anecdote from one of my first couple of years working with FASA, and met a guy who was not working for FASA but was very interested and played Shadowrun, and was talking, as gamers do, about the game that he was playing in and the things that were going on. And he started talking about, this is Shadowrun 2nd Edition, so he was talking about these purple-furred elves who lived in a lunar colony in his game. And that's not, that wasn't my Shadowrun, but it was very much his Shadowrun. And if I told you his name that rhymes with Reeve Benson, then you would realize that some of that became the real Shadowrun later. So yeah, you can't discount the games that people are playing and the people they're playing with, or the style that they use to get stuff across, because you might enjoy it if you try.
Especially if you ever want to get across into publishing. Like one of the first things I had to learn as a publisher, actually I learned it beforehand. Thankfully I had good people working with me, so that we had these discussions before like running into the real thing. But like, one of the first books I published, someone wrote back and told us how they used some of the characters in the book, and I'm like, well, that's not at all the intent of that character in the book, but I'm glad you guys had fun. That's pretty awesome. In the back of my head, I'm going, you did what to my character? But it's like, no, that's your character now. This is out in the wild, and that's your game and your world. And if that story made sense to you, then that's exactly what should happen.
Exactly. Having made the majority of the characters for the Gencan't tournaments, I was sometimes, I'm not going to say horrified, but just totally thrown by the way that the descriptions and the characters that I'd created were played and embraced in completely different ways than I had even considered.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Fate, to kind of be more specific about some of the things we've done, is for Potentia, we have a number of iconic characters that are in the core rulebook that I use at conventions and let players play. And because Fate gives descriptive phrases about the characters that work as game mechanics, it's a lot easier to explain, how to role play a specific character, because you can show them, well, this is their personality, and it's also a game mechanic. And so people are rewarded, they get bonuses for playing that character in character, as it were. So it's not like they pick up a thief and try to play them as a fighter.
They were scored for the tournaments. They were scored based on how well they role played the character they were given.
Right.
Yes, but if you took it in a good direction, if you were in it and you sold it, then
you could do some interesting stuff.
I mean, there's a good argument that like if you were talking in D&D terms, that Conan would definitely be multi-classed into thief. But my point is, it's like I sit down and run this adventure over and over with the same sample characters, and it never plays the same way twice, because players are constantly finding new ways to kind of exploit these abilities and these character traits. But they can do it with the guidance of knowing how to play that character. And so there's this kind of infinite variety within this sandbox, but the borders of the sandbox are pretty clear.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing to me. That's just the infinite variety of creativity that makes gaming so much fun.
Darcy, you got anything?
Yeah. Now I was just I'm replying yes quietly to everything that's just been said. It's a different kind of magic. It takes it a different level from GMing at home, and having made the crossover from playing at the convention to then GMing those same types of tournament and what have you. It's how the sausage gets made. So some of it's not as pretty. Some of that magic from the playing is lost because now you're on the other side and you can see the strings and the pulleys and the stuff that you thought you'd made up. And yeah, sure, that's what we wanted. Oh wait, they were winging it. Okay.
Yeah, you could see just how much of it was on railroad tracks the entire time.
Crap. Yeah. But you're making that magic for the other people, and
Right.
it's such a rush. It's a very different kind of rush. I had no regrets when I made the switch over.
One of the most interesting things to me for running games at conventions is the time constraint, because when you're running at a home game, everybody might go, well, I've got to leave at 11 because I've got to work in the morning or whatever. But if you're not done exactly at 11, everybody doesn't just get up and leave regardless. But at a gaming convention, you have a block of time, and then once that block of time is done, everybody who's at your game, they might have another event that they need to go to.
Or there may be another group coming to your table.
Right, or you've got another group coming to your table, so you don't have the luxury of just going, well, okay, we can game for an extra 15 minutes and wrap this up. No,
it's not even just that. It's also the fact that like my game, kind of like we game on Sunday nights. So when we hit our okay, that's 8:00. It is time to wrap things up because people do have to get home because they have work in the next morning or whatever. So we don't necessarily game a little further, but we always have next week.
Right, and there's that as well.
At a convention, you don't have next week. You basically got to tell your whole story and try to tell, give people, that their money's worth, if you will. What time they've invested in that game, you want to reward that as best you can within the time frame you've got. And so, depending on what your goals are, when everybody sits down at the table, you want to try and serve those goals the best you can.
Yeah, it's an interesting tightrope because on the one hand, you want to let the players have fun, and you want to give them the freedom to make choices and role play and stuff. But at the other side, you're trying to make sure that you fit everything into that time frame. So the players are often on rails whether they know it or not, because you need to get them from point A to point B to point C to point D by the end of the time block. And I know I've had more than one time where I've had groups I just couldn't manage to rein in enough, and so I'll watch. I always leave a now I'll have my phone in front of me, but I used to always have a watch that I would hang up on the GM screen so that I could always see the time, and I would know, okay, well, it's a 2-hour mark, and then at the 3-hour mark I'd be like, okay, well, I need to be here in the adventure, otherwise I need to start wrapping things up.
Yeah.
And so every now and then I'll find that I have to, if I couldn't get the players to that point by then, I'll find I kind of have to skip over things, and I'll be like, all right, we're going to fast forward. You guys did this, this, and this, and you found out this piece of information. And they're like, huh? And I go, we're running out of time. We're just going to zip, hit the fast forward button.
Yeah, with the Gencan't tournaments, because they had to be so tight since they were judged and
Oh,
moved and all that
God.
stuff. We would run with the GMs and our area, Rich and Chris and myself and a few others. We would run each round 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of the practice sessions, yeah, we'd run those things a lot.
Yeah.
You also write them for less time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
It's
that's
a 4-hour slot. You're writing for 2.5 hours.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
that's-
when I was doing missions, that was always a thing I kept in mind with when we were doing the missions adventures. Was you'd write them so that they can be run comfortably in 4 hours, even with wiggle room.
Yeah, my most infamous story. This is as a player, not a runner, but first time playing with the group that I then fell into gaming wise. Was our Shadowrun GM for first edition. We were playing at a local game convention, in sci-fi convention. We were playing Paranoia. And it took us the 4 hours to go through what the two GMs had thought were going to take the first 5 minutes. And so every hour or so, one of them would look to the other one and goes, 5 minutes, Mike. And then we kept going, and another hour later, 5 minutes, Mike. And we had a blast. We were active. We were doing things. We were just not doing what they'd written. You can't quite do that with Shadowrun.
No.
It doesn't quite work. But the bigger key takeaways is the players have.
Yeah, clearly, Darcy, you haven't sat through the legwork session of any Shadowrun with my
Not with your group. I've done it with mine.
We had
years ago too. Yep.
Yeah, we had a tournament round at Origins one year, where the third round of the tournament was being run. This was when it was still an elimination tournament, because the tournaments used to be at Gencan't it was 12, at Origins it was 8 teams, and then second night would go down to 4 teams. And then last night there would also be 2 teams, and at
Origins, it was one story.
Yeah, it's all one story.
You forget. You got to play chapter 2 if you progressed.
Yeah,
you got to play the end if you progressed.
Yeah, we eventually ended up doing it so that everybody plays all the rounds of the tournament, because you would end up at the last night, you would have 2 or 3 other groups that would show up just to watch to see how the adventure ended. But yeah, we had one year where somebody, the GM, I don't know what was going on. The final round of the adventure was all celebrity GMs, so to speak. It was before most of us were writing for Shadowrun. So we had Steve Canson ran one, Mike Mulvihill was running one of them, and we had a couple of other authors that had volunteered to run a round of the adventure for us. And one of the guys, for whatever reason, apparently he just could not cut his team short. And the tournament ran from 8 till midnight. And his team went till 4 in the morning. And we're all just sitting there waiting for him to finish, because it's the last round of the tournament. We have to do all the scoring and everything that night so that we could announce the winners in the morning. And all of us, including Mike Mulvihill, who was the line developer, we kept going up to him and going, "Dude, you got to wrap this up." And he'd be like, all right, I'm working on it. And oh my God, was that miserable.
So one of the things that I do when I sit down at a convention is kind of I lay out what our goals are, because it's always a brand new group of people, and for me it's usually one, I want to I'm teaching something I'm selling, so I'm basically teaching people the world of Jinsha or something like that, and 2 is to teach the rules if people haven't played a game before, and I kind of like figure out who's played, who hasn't. But I also kind of outline, a certain, I kind of take charge right from the beginning. But when you're running for Shadowrun, you're getting a lot of people probably who are either familiar with the game or otherwise, familiar with gaming in general.
Right.
What's your approach at a convention when you're teaching or when you're running a game like that for like Catalyst Game Labs? How do you introduce yourself at the table and kind of give people the parameters of a convention game?
Well, it's weird because we've done a few different things over the years. And so for example, what Darcy and Jeff and I have been kind of talking about a little bit is the old tournaments that we used to run. Because those used to be the main focus of what FASA did back in the day. We didn't do a whole lot of other events. There was demos and stuff that were run at the booth, but outside of the booth, it was just these tournaments. And over the years, that's evolved to the point where we would start doing what we used to call one-shots, which were just, show up and play a game, to eventually the missions campaign, which is the living campaign, where you make a character and you can take that character from game to game to game, and you get tangible progress, and you get it's kind of like the old RPGA, and in fact, it's an evolution of Virtual Seattle, which was the Shadowrun RPGA setting. So for the tournaments, the players were experienced; they knew what they were getting into, and at the very beginning, we would explain to them that it was scored. They were scored based on various areas like progression and how well they knew the rules and how well they role played the character they were given. For one shots, it was a little more open, and the GMs usually knew that they would have to teach rules if players were new, because we would sometimes have new players. And so that would always be something you'd sit down at the table and you'd be like, well, has everybody played Shadowrun? Are you familiar with it? And if not, you would take a couple of minutes just to kind of give them an overview of the game world. But Shadowrun's a complicated system, so it's hard to really, when you got a 4-hour game with a bunch of experienced players and one newbie, it's hard to really explain the rules in depth to them. So you end up doing a lot of hand-holding, where you basically just ask them, well, what do you want to do? And you go, okay, well, look on your character sheet. You're going to want to take this attribute and this attribute, and you roll that many dice. And you kind of just handhold them, and you give them some options, and you let them do what they want, but they're not going to be able to really learn the system as well.
And especially at a tournament, or not a tournament, at a convention like this, most Shadowrun players are also cool about that they then I've seen a lot. They do the buddy system.
Yeah, somebody will sit down and be like, "Hey, I'll help you out."
Somebody, whoever's sitting next to them, one of them will say, "Hey, okay, roll this or that," pointing at where. Helping.
These days, the majority of our focus is missions. We run a crap ton of missions, and they get sold out. We run, I think they run like 60, 70 tables now every year, and they sell out almost instantly. They're usually sold out within a day of the event registration going up. But besides missions, which, like I said, you're expected to know the basics of the game. However, we also run what they call crap. I don't remember what the name. Basically, there's two shorter things. There's two 2-hour events that we run. One is a character creation event, where you come in and we provide books for you, and there's one GM who'll walk the group through creating a character to play for missions. And then there's one that's a introductory game, where we'll sit you down, introduce you to the world, and give you an overview of the game rules.
Stuffer Shack.
So yeah, it's kind of a Stuffer Shack thing. Yeah, the Build a Runner. Thank you, Build a Runner, and then First Taste. That's what it's called. Is the little demo adventure.
Cool. Yeah, for me, it's always, I don't think I've ever run a game where I wasn't teaching somebody the basics of, Fate, or the basics of Mutants and Masterminds. I've never really done kind of like advanced play, because for me, it's always been, I'm either at a convention that isn't about gaming, like a lot of anime conventions, and that kind of puts me in the position of teaching new people what the hobby is every time, which I love. It's not a complaint. It's just a completely different experience from when you're sitting down with a bunch of veterans and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate these guys and their personalities, when we're playing this adventure. And, I've never run a tournament game where you have winners. Basically, for me, it's always been, well, everybody's kind of a winner approach. That's kind of always been the framework that I'm running games in. It's like, as if we're all having fun, we're all winning. And that's, it's like when we have given away prizes, it's usually been kind of like, I try to make sure that everyone at the table, as opposed to favoriting someone too much. So it's just, because what I'm not trying to do is create a sense that somebody lost.
No, that's understandable.
For a first-time game, I think that's kind of important. But it's also just going to be different from person to person what they expect out of a game. Some people want to win it in a tactical framework, and some people want to win it in a role-playing framework.
I think too, some of it is that some of the attitudes and some of what people are looking for has changed over the years as well. Mm-hmm. Especially at gaming conventions, because I think there used to be a lot more of that competitive stuff. There used to be a lot more of D&D tournaments and Shadowrun tournaments and whatever that would be run at conventions, and you don't see those nearly as much as you used to. Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of the reasons we went to doing a 3-night, it's a 2-night adventure. It's not 3 nights anymore. It's a 2-night adventure, and while there is still a winner, everybody gets to play through the whole thing. There's no elimination rounds anymore. So for a lot of people, they just show up and they play it as basically as an 8-hour game, rather than anything competitive. And I think that's preferred. And it's also one of the reasons we started doing the living campaign as heavily as we did. Is a lot more enjoyable, I think, for players to be able to create their own character and to be able to watch their character grow and develop and stuff throughout the adventures.
And even in the old tournaments, we always made a really kind of conscious effort to invite people to come back the next day, come by the FASA booth and see what happened, come back the next night and see, what the next portion was, and kind of print up a recap for everybody so they felt like they were part of that story, whether they progressed or not. Because it was, especially if they did really well or did something really novel or really unique, they may not necessarily have moved on, but they were engaged and they were involved and they were, wrapped up in the story to a point. And so we always wanted to make sure that they were very conscious of what was going on and who was progressing and what the story was, so they got to see the whole picture instead of just that one little piece.
So let's go ahead and shift gears over to anime cons a little bit.
Okay.
So I think most of us. I've actually never done a full-on anime convention.
Okay.
There's just never been one run near me that I've ever gotten a chance to go to. I used to want to go to ASIN and them back in the day, and just never got a chance to. But
do you like voice actors?
What is anime conventions like? And I think I know kind of where this will be going, but I think Darcy can probably speak to this a little bit, and I know James can. And how has things changed over the years?
Well, I can definitely speak to that. My first anime, and that was I went to Anime Expo, and that was kind of the first notion that I had that anime as a fandom was something much bigger and more diverse than kind of what I had experienced, because most of the people I knew were people I was meeting online in multi-user games, and people I had kind of hung out with at school or whatever, and we kind of talked about, and it was always the kind of weird niche stuff that we could find in like Tower Records or whatever. That was the only thing that we really had back in the 90s in terms of
I worked at Suncoast in the 90s, so yeah.
Right. And then so it was all the R-rated stuff, because that had the shock value of penetrating the market. It would get attention, and then I was discovering fan subs from my online friends, and I was discovering things like Tenchi Muyo and other things that were a little more mainstream, and they were telling the kinds of stories that American animation didn't tell, and so that kind of is why I got into it. And then when I started hanging people at anime conventions, I was drawn to the Artist Alley because I was an artist, and a lot of us as artists there were kind of there was a lot of different skill levels there. You had some people who were really polished and some people who were even comic book pros that would just come down and hang out, and then some of us who were just getting started, and there was this sense of community there. But it was also kind of a boys' club back then. I mean, yes, there were women.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. But it was like a lot of the artists were guys, and a lot of us were drawing kind of cheesecake stuff, and getting attention because of that. So it kind of reinforced that sense of
that applies heavily to gaming conventions back then too.
Yes. Yeah, and the thing about it was that a lot of us, at that time, conventions and anime in general was kind of seen as like an adult hobby, because most of us who were getting into it had either the money or the time or the exposure to an older group of fans that connected us to this stuff. So we had the expectations of being able to draw and have like nudity in our artwork or whatever on the table. Over the years, once like Sailor Moon hit television, everything started to change very quickly. And between 1995 and like 2005, there was a big shift in the average age of a con goer, and we started seeing more and more teenagers, more and more younger people, and we had to start modifying our behavior and show at the table and kind of the expectations of what we would get, because in the 90s and early 2000s, I was making rent and making decent money just doing art and anime conventions. That was my main income, as I would go from con to con like some kind of crazy, smut drawn hobo, and it was it was bizarre, but it was fun. But at the same time, once that ended, it was kind of like, well, this didn't really prepare me to do anything else, and that kind of led to this kind of extended sort of tapering off of my presence at Anime Artist Alleys, because more and more people were going to conventions to buy pre-made stuff. Like they were going to get something that was ready right off the shelf that they could grab, pay money for, and walk away. And whether that was licensed merchandise or arts and crafts type stuff, like a lot of the artists I know shifted to making plush hats or whatever, and that evolution kind of changed what the Artist Alley was for a lot of people, for a lot of the guests. So when they came in and saw us drawing, they didn't know what to do. It's like they would just walk past us because they didn't know what we were for. So a lot of but they would walk over to the guy with the headbands, and they would just plunk down $20 and take a Naruto headband and then be gone. And it's like a different expectation from the audience of what they were going there to do. And so I still get my regular fans who are coming in, and hanging out with me for like their 16th year or whatever of seeing me and getting something from me at a convention. But they weren't, that's not enough to kind of sustain me as a career. So it was kind of like, well, I need to find another income stream because this one is not the same thing it used to be. But it was an interesting evolution, and I think it's overall good, because making this accessible is very much the same as making comics and games more accessible to a wider audience, to a younger audience. It means that we as creators have to be more thoughtful about the audience we're creating for. And
it's
really good.
And it's better for the hobby overall to have the younger kids and have a broader audience, because it means it's growing.
Hey James, do you know Steve Bennett?
I do. We're on first name basis, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's actually I consider a friend of mine, even though we, obviously we're friends on Facebook, but I actually, I've met him. So yeah, him, Bob DeJesus. I'm sure I could drop a couple of other names that anyone who knows Steve Bennett would know, but like I was a guest of honor at JFAX, which is the Japanese Art and Film Expo up in Michigan. I was a guest there for like I want to say over 10 years, but I mean I was going there for like 16 years straight. So that was I've only missed out of the past since like JFAX, I want to say 3 or 4. I've only missed maybe 3 of them, I think. And this year was one of those, and I was sad I couldn't go. But they've shifted their their dates to the point where they kind of overlap with conventions I can't miss because I'm in games now. So it's kind of disappointing. But
did you ever get down to any of the Florida cons?
Yeah.
JCon?
Which one?
JCon in Orlando.
I think I did JCon once.
I was a guest relations coordinator for them for a few years.
Cool. I didn't do that one as a guest. I went to the Artist Alley. I remember that convention because it almost felt like a throwback to a smaller type of convention when I went.
Yep.
Compared to things like
AWA
like
or something.
or whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Acon's ridiculous now. It's so huge.
Yeah. But I had a good time. It was man, what's weird about anime conventions is I sort of peg where they are in history, not by when I went there, but by which anime they were promoting when I was there. So it's like, I think that was the one where they were just releasing the dub for Gatekeepers. If somebody wants to hit IMDb, they can probably pin what year that was.
Darcy, you've attended as a guest, right? At ASIN and them. Tell us what an anime convention is like as a guest.
As a guest, well, let's see. ASIN has grown over the years. Anime Central, I don't think then. Like 10 years ago, it was in a hotel, It would take a hotel that had convention space. It is now all of the Rosemont Convention Center that's in the suburbs of Chicago. But it has a dealer's room, not quite as big as Gencan's, but close, with a separate artist alley and spaces in the attached hotel with panels. What do you do? There's not gaming, but there's panel there. Jeff or someone was joking about voiceover actors. Yes, tons of the people, because it's all animated. You don't see their faces, but you know their voices. And they're there in person, either as Q&A panels or maybe to get autographs and that kind of thing. There were also a lot of panels on cosplay, how to do the sewing, how to design your own costume. There's a panel devoted entirely to creative mashups, how to make things work or not work, so that a joke won't fall flat. They seem to be designed to spend a day. Although there are then people that will spend the whole time there, but there's not much in the way of repeat as far as panels and that kind of thing goes. The way a creation convention repeats from one day to the next.
Yeah,
there's.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say they very recently started having I don't want to call it a free game room, but free with admission. There's a room full of arcade video games and whatnot that they're free to play with your badge. You're not pumping quarters into. And the Battletech pods recently moved into that space.
Nice.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I know that there's OhioCon down in Columbus in, I think, January, which is a good size anime con now. And I know a few years ago they started inviting folks in to add gaming to their overall convention experience, because I know that we have a couple of Shadowrun guys that go and set up and run down there. One of the things I was thinking about how anime conventions might have changed over the years, and this is just a perception from the outside and from being interested in anime, because I remember back in the 90s, especially the early to mid 90s and even the later 90s, anime was just not that accessible, because it came on video cassette generally, and the video cassettes were expensive. It was $30 or whatever for a single cassette that would have one or maybe two episodes on it if you were lucky.
And that's only the anime that was being released through general market.
Right, and there was a lot of anime that didn't come over.
A lot of anime was released through through television distribution, which meant that you didn't get you would only be able to find a tape as a rental.
Right.
And if you wanted to buy a rental tape, that was more like $100.
Right, because they used a stronger.
No matter how long it was.
Yeah, they used a stronger tape stock so that it would last longer and you could play it more often. But
it was designed for rental stores to own it.
At the time, there was also the big fan sub market, where people would trade fan subs of tapes that they'd gotten from Japan or that they'd copied off of tapes rented and stuff from the video store. And that's actually what you'd get a lot of at the conventions, is people, because I know Origins and Gencan't both, I think they still do a little. I think Gencan't still has an anime room. Origins doesn't anymore, but it used to be they had a room dedicated where they would be showing anime all day long, because that was, really the only way people could see it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially some of the stuff that was that wasn't brought over or wasn't broadcast on TV. And now
I saw a lot of stuff for the first time in viewing rooms at like 90s and early 2000s anime conventions.
Yeah, there was when I was living down in Cincinnati, there was an anime club at Cincinnati University that a couple of friends of mine used to attend on a regular basis. And I went with them a few times, and they would show fan dubs there. But nowadays, with DVDs are still kind of expensive, but they're not nearly as expensive as the old tapes used to be. There's a lot more that's been released on DVD over the years, and of course now you've got streaming where everything is released streaming. It's really rare to have any seasonal anime that isn't available somewhere. Easily.
And in between that, you had Cartoon Network. Yeah,
Right.
and you don't just have Cartoon Network. There's now like 3 different cable channels.
So I imagine that's affected anime conventions quite a bit too.
It's interesting because whereas back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was almost a contentious relationship between anime fans and the distributors and the owners, the publishers in Japan, because, people would want to showcase stuff that had not been licensed over here. They would want to showcase stuff that had not been ever heard of in America, and kind of that was the draw to an animation convention. But once anime companies started distributing on digital media like discs, like DVDs and things like that, where they could release things with multiple languages and had that had new distribution vectors where they weren't locked into these kind of archaic style distribution contracts, they started looking for opportunities to partner with animation conventions. And so you've got, nowadays you're getting announcements for licenses at animation conventions or anime conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And so the viewing rooms are more about promoting stuff that's being sold as opposed to this is the weirdest, most obscure stuff we can find. That said, you still find those at anime cons, but they're more of a niche crowd. They're not the same crowd that's walking in on the... So you're not as likely to walk in on something like, Legend of the Overfiend during the day as you might have been back in the 90s. But that's
my eyes.
That's an X-rated horror anime for those of you who want to avoid that sort of thing.
Yes, if you've ever seen anybody make the joke tentacle porn, it's usually that's one of the big ones they're referring to.
Yeah, so that was kind of the start of that whole craze. But the point being that you're not going to find super obscure or bizarre that you won't also hear about in other vectors, like from your favorite YouTuber or your favorite anime news website. You're gonna find this information, and you're gonna get exposed to these kind of things through other vectors now. So the animation convention is more about the community that it's built up, and a lot of that has to do with the cosplayers, the artists, and the vendors and the publishers, and people, celebrity guests from Japan coming over. So it's a much richer environment now, I think, in terms of fans getting to meet actual creators, people from Japan who actually make this stuff now. These people are coming to smaller conventions, or smaller conventions are more able to invite these guests. They have a little more clout, and because they're kind of more legit, since they're actually promoting this stuff already for the distributors. So it's a different platform now than it was back in the 90s, and so you have less of a kind of a guerrilla approach to what you're showing, and what people are doing there. You're not gonna run into as many instances of the guy selling bootlegs in the dealer's room, because most conventions shut that stuff down because it's bad for business. It's bad for business, and it's bad for the hobby. Now that we have legitimate streams that we can go to and go, okay, what's on Crunchyroll? Oh, I'm going to watch Gundam 00, and that's a thing that I never thought I could. Back in the 90s, I never thought I'd get to see an actual Gundam show that hadn't been edited to the point where it was just a movie instead of a TV series.
Yeah.
Not in America, anyway. Not without trading fan subs. And now it's different. And it's as a fan, it's so much better if you actually love getting to see the best quality. And I don't have to worry about scan lines or how many generations down from the first my copy is. I don't. It's like I'm actually getting to see, high definition video with brilliant colors, and I just got and now we're getting shows that are inspired by these decades of anime fans. Things like Legend of Korra, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the new Voltron. These
The
shows
new
wouldn't
Voltron is
happen.
amazing.
It is. It's absolutely fantastic. Do not spoil season 2 for me because I'm still on season 1, but it is amazing. And I'm a big fan of this kind of influence that animation has taken from the Japanese anime fandom, which has grown to more of a general animation fandom now.
Well, and it's
So
fun too because you've also got anime pulling from more classic American sources too. Sometimes, like My Hero Academia pulls really heavily from American comics and American superheroes.
H.P. Lovecraft has been
Oh my God!
a running joke, or even just an actual theme in a lot of anime.
Not just
going back to Ixer,
not just
Ixer 1.
Yeah, but not even just what's funny is not even just Lovecraft, specifically the Call of Cthulhu role playing game. I've seen it. I've seen at least 3 different anime that have made Sand Loss jokes. And actually shown like a character sheet or dice or something to back it up that they're referring to the role-playing game.
Yep.
Which is just hilarious to me. What is it? Nyarko-san? The Crawling Chaos?
I think that's it.
That's the one where it's anthropomorphic. Basically, it's cute scroll girls who are all embodiments of various Cthulhu deity, Cthulhu Great Old Ones.
Mm-hmm.
That one is awesome. Hilarious and so messed up.
Yeah, I mean, role-playing games and, gaming and anime have, friends, on the down low for decades.
Oh, yeah.
Lodos War
right, that was
based on a Dungeons & Dragons-like campaign that some, folks novelized over in Japan, and then that became popular enough that they made a manga, anime, and etc., and that grew in popularity. And so that kind of synergy with gaming has now evolved to a lot of video game synergy between anime and video games. And the same thing is happening over here, which is great.
So, all right, since it's after 9:30, let's kind of shift gears a little bit more so we can do some not Squirrel Girls, just anime schoolgirls.
Schoolgirl.
Squirrel Girls would be hilarious, though.
Yeah. Schoolgirls are so much better than Squirrel Girls, dude.
I don't know.
Have you guys seen the Avengers cartoons that they have in Japan?
I haven't. I have not gotten to see those yet.
So good. They're weird because they're not told using the narrative of the American comics.
Freudian slip.
Great.
One-sided die. I will admit that Squirrel Girl is one of my favorite Marvel characters.
Did you see that she just got cast?
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing she's gotten cast for live action for the New Warriors TV show that they're going to be doing, and she's also in the a new cartoon.
Yeah, there's a new animated movie coming out. What is it? Something Rising, like Heroes Rising or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called, but it's got Kamala Khan and Squirrel Girl.
That looks fantastic.
It looks great. It's got Chloe Bennett.
Yes.
Reprising her role as Quake on the cartoon.
So, all right. So, let's shift over to gaming conventions a little bit more then. Jeff, you've run conventions. You've helped organize conventions from the ground up. Because I know you worked on SunQuest and you were talking in chat about MegaCon.
Yeah, in fact, SunQuest, the first game company I ever worked with, eventually was bought out by MegaCon and became their role-playing group, their role-playing section. Because they didn't want to actually run it, and we didn't want to run it for them anymore, so they had a crap ton of money from CrossGen Comics at the time, and just said, yeah, you know what, why don't you sell it to us?
What is organizing a convention like? Because I've done quite a bit of different. I've worn quite a bit of different hats at conventions, but the one I haven't done is on the more administrative setting up a convention end.
It's like a year-round unpaid internship. It really is. It's everything from picking locations to sorting out hotels to getting food and beverage contracts, finding guests, making travel arrangements, finding GMs, finding ways to advertise your con. It's all of the different possible media concepts all combined into a bunch of people who, for the most part, have probably never done any of
I
that.
have no idea what they're doing.
What's always interesting is watching the transition of a convention from one group, from the people who were managing it one year to another group. When people,
Oh, absolutely.
because people burn out eventually.
You do.
Else in their lives, and so the next group come in, and depending on how good the teaching skills are, those handoffs can be either very smooth or very, very rough.
Yeah, the
And a
total.
lot of times it can depend on the interests too. The interests of your current group may be very different from the interests of the people who you are grooming to come in and take over for you.
Mm-hmm.
So even when you're teaching them the basics, their point of view, their interests, their direction may be very different.
Yeah, I know. I've seen Origins has transitioned over the years for a couple of different ways. Because I know Origins used to be largely a wargaming convention.
Yep.
And over the years, it went wargaming. Then it went with a much more focus on role playing and card games. And these games, in these days, partially due to the fact that Columbus has a just massive board game society that's based out of Columbus and Ohio State University, and they sponsor a board game room and stuff. So board gaming is actually a huge focus of Origins now.
It is, and I feel like I was just down in Florida in July for a couple of days, and I went to Dice Tower Con, which is a board game convention there, and they really feel like a throwback to some of the older style game cons from the 80s and 90s. They're typically limited in size. You only get a certain number of people in. They're longer cons. Dice Tower Con's a 5-day con held over 4th of July weekend. And they're very communal. They're very, everybody knows everybody. And that's the way cons used to be back before they grew to huge unwieldy size, and that success has some consequences with it. Gencan's great, but I don't know that I want to go back again when there's 65,000 people there.
Yeah, Gencan is. I like I said, I love Gencan, and I once again I recommend everybody goes to Gencan at least once, just for the experience of it, because there is just something about walking into that exhibit room or seeing the crowd that gathers before the exhibit hall opens and just seeing thousands of gamers just all excited, and there's an energy that's really hard to capture.
It's like a rock show.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you go there and it is people. It's your people. It's 65,000 people that have interests exactly the same as you, or at least very, very similar. So it's worth doing, I think, at least once. Of course, my recommendation though is if you do it, pace yourself and do a little research ahead of time so that you know what you're getting yourself into.
Hydrate.
Yes.
Be sure to eat.
Read the program guide. Follow the directions about washing yourself and taking showers.
Yeah.
621 is the key. 621. 6 hours of sleep, 2 meals a day, 1 shower a day.
I'd say that's for people our age. 321 is for the younger crowd.
Oh no.
I used to run mostly on about 3 to 4 hours of sleep, and I can't do that so much anymore.
To me, it's like 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And one of the interesting things was, so a little, kind of going back to my 90s and early 2000s, I was the weird guy because, one, I don't drink, at least not public drinking. If I ever have a beer, it's usually at home, and it's usually like 1 beer every couple of months. So it's not like I'm against drinking or anything. It's just I'm not part of that culture. So, I was never staying up to go up to any parties or anything like that. I would basically hit the artist alley hang out with my friends there, and then maybe go out to dinner afterwards, like at like the Denny's or whatever 24-hour place was there, and like sketch and draw with my buddies. And then I'd disappear and like wake up, and I'd be there early in the morning opening my table when nobody else was at the artist alley. So I was the guy who always had, great sleep. I also, back then, I was on Ritalin, so it was kind of my whole sleep schedule was kind of determined by medication as well. So I was very much locked into this very specific regimen, and people got to know me as the guy who was there first every morning, opening shop, and running my booth all day long. And it was just that's kind of what made me different in that particular group of people, because a lot of the artists would go to the parties and drink and hang out with the other guests and whatnot, and I was the guy who was there mainly to hang out with the artist alley crowd.
Yeah, I've spent most of my conventions. I've been working the conventions most of my career, so to speak. I've done 22 years ago would be the first time I went to a convention. Well, the first time I went to a major convention. I went to a few smaller conventions. Smaller conventions are interesting, like the little tiny like local conventions, just because
I love them.
That they're interesting. They can be fun. They also can be just boring. Depends on if you got enough friends to go with and stuff. Because I've been to a couple where, the exhibit hall was like 3 dudes selling old junk of theirs off of a table, and like 3 local comic stores that had a half-assed table, and that was like it. That was the entire exhibit hall. And then there was like a half dozen games being run each day, which were really, really hit and miss.
Sounds like Icon on the island.
But then, and then there was other years where we went and, we ended up, there was like an area that had tables and stuff. There was like a communal area. And I remember we ended up setting up there, and my friend Steve Tinner just started running games. Just nothing scheduled, nothing planned. And we'd have random people come over and go, "What you guys playing?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm just running such and such." And they'd be like, "Can we play?" Sure. So, that was kind of neat.
It's kind of weird. My first gaming convention, which was actually one of my first conventions, I think it was my first actual convention, was back in the, I want to say, mid to late 80s. And it was a gaming convention down in Florida, because I grew up in South Florida. And when I went to this convention, it was really bizarre, going around and playing all these different games that I'd never had a chance to play. A lot of them I'd only seen advertised in Dragon magazine, and having different kinds of experiences and learning from other people's mistakes, which was useful. But then I'd go and leave kind of the gaming area and go up to the room, and like all along the hallway you would find people camped out with little pocket board games like Car Wars or
wow.
Illuminati, things like that.
Yeah.
Little things like that, who are like spread out like everywhere they could find a horizontal space to play, on the floor, wherever. And this was just at like this hotel in Florida, and so it was just really kind of weird. That it was like this party atmosphere that ran 24/7, and it was my first kind of experience with that, and it kind of prepared me for some of the weird things that I saw at anime conventions. But the idea that people show up, and this is something that just drives me nuts, because I understand people desperately want to go to conventions because they love the community and everything, but get a room, please.
Yes.
I have seen so many people try to go cheap on the conventions. I remember, some people will go to the convention and get there and look for somebody who they can share a room with. Like, they have no plan on where they're going to sleep, except their car if they're desperate. And
having run cons, man,
there's something funny. Know. Yes. Oh, from the FASA days and touching into the FanPro days. there were of the certain number of rooms that pay for the GMs, and they'd pay for standard occupancy of 2 queen-size beds, so say 4 people. But there'd be people that were economically challenged, so to speak, and they would love to cram 8 people into a room to then not spend as much money on the hotel room because they had no budget. And so then there'd be people like me. But then to balance that out, there'd be people like me and Rich, not Osterhoff, but the other Rich, friend of Steve's. I'm blanking out on his last name. But there were like 3 of us. We would take the small room. We were the ones that had established careers in other areas, so that we were not completely broke, and nothing wrong with being broke but still going to Gencan't. But there'd be one room with 8 people, and so then there'd be our room with 3 people.
Bull doesn't know anything about rooms with 8 people in it.
No, never.
There was a room with 2. Once there was a room with 2 people, I think.
At least the 1 or 2 times we ever did 8 people, it was at least a suite.
Yeah.
The fortunate thing about my sleeping habits then was that because I slept really hard, I would go back to the room and crash around 11 o'clock at night, and no one would be in the room. And then I'd wake up at 8 or 9 in the morning, or even 7 in the morning before anyone used the shower, and I'd be the first person to use the shower before everyone destroyed it. And so I was like, that was my saving grace for rooms where we were cramming 12 people into a single room. But I have had my favorite story about don't go to a con without a room is basically I was setting up my Artist Alley table one morning, and somebody came by and said, "Are you such and such artist?" Because they were looking to pick up a commission or something, and we're looking for the artist. And I said, "No, that's this person." And they hadn't set up yet. They were on the table next to me, and I reached over and knocked on the table. I said, "They'll be here later today." And when I knocked on the table, there was a thump underneath it, and somebody literally rolled out from under the table, stood up, and just staggered off. And we were both looking at them going, "What the hell?" Someone had just decided that was their hotel.
Oh yeah, dude, that used to be in the 80s and 90s. That was a thing. You had to lock places like that up because people would get in there and sleep. And
yeah, back then Artist Alleys were not a featured event. They were in hallway, so we were just tucked between areas. So those areas didn't get locked down. So you had to pack everything back up and take it with you at the end of the day. Nowadays most Artist Alleys are actually a featured room. And
they're either a featured room or they're in the exhibit hall.
Right. So they're like a slice of the exhibit hall is set aside for the Artist Alley. And so you get these, you get a completely different environment where you can leave your merchandise overnight, where you can, show up without having to fight for a table because your table's assigned. I remember back in the day when, it was first come, first serve, anyone could sit down at a table.
Table combat. Fight!
Oh, man. There were people who would, just decided to squat at Artist Alley tables because they wanted a place to leave their stuff. And they would just trade off watching their stuff. And they weren't even artists. They would just sit there and draw on, napkins to kind of say, "I'm drawing stuff. I can stay here."
Oh, yeah.
It was ridiculous. That was before we actually had to pay for tables, but that, and again, that just kind of shows how much has changed, in the late 90s when people started charging for tables, then conventions had to treat us differently because now we were paying, and so we had rights too,
Right.
You weren't an afterthought.
Yeah.
Right.
So I actually had, I won't mention the convention because, the people have changed over and they do a much better job these days. But there was one year where we had paid for tables at this convention, and they packed up all the tables because they wanted to line up the cosplay line through that hallway. And we were still, but we were paying for tables. And so they said, well, the convention hours are specifically this and this. You can't operate your table outside of convention hours, which by itself made sense. But they would pack us up at random times of the day and send us out of the room, and then not have the tables brought back when the line was gone. And I basically showed up, and there were 20 artists, most of these people were kids, young people who were trying to make, a quick buck, but they were all really talented artists who had paid for their tables, and the tables weren't coming back. And I basically went into the convention, room and raised Cain a bit. Basically
You should have. It's a totally dick move.
people in the hallway were like going, "Wait, is it?" What? And within 10 minutes, they had our booths set back up, and they brought the tables back, and they didn't take them away again for the rest of the convention. And I'm like, these kids paid money for those tables. You can't just take your tables away. We have rights too. And I was famous for like the guy who yelled at the convention.
I can remember the first time Gencan't charged for artist tables. It was like a huge thing because people weren't thinking about the rights they were getting. They were just suddenly like you said, kids who were just looking to maybe make their money back from the con, and they were like, "We had to prepay. We had to reserve one. What?" It was a culture shock.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, when certain conventions do this in certain states are really anal about collecting tax. So, it kind of becomes this issue of, at a convention, are you selling prints? Are you going to have to charge sales tax? Who's collecting the tax? Who's making sure the tax gets collected? That's all stuff that changed drastically, kind of going from the 90s into the 2000s, and then growing as more and more states become more and more aware of how much money these events pull in. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Gencan't famously stood up for allowing transgender people to use the bathroom of their choice and blah blah blah, and making sure that everyone who went to Gencan't had a safe space a couple of years ago. Is they can basically say, we bring in millions, literally millions of dollars into the city economy, and it's like they have the kind of clout now that draws attention.
Yeah.
But with that comes kind of the micromanaging of, oh, now you have to pay your taxes.
Right.
Milwaukee learned that
Go ahead.
after Gencan't left Milwaukee. Milwaukee figured that out.
Milwaukee was not friendly to Gencan't, unfortunately.
They didn't understand it. That was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But,
We were the
one
free.
of the biggest things, back then was how much of the cons were run as volunteer cons. One or two people might have been making the money, but most of the time the cons were run, just the money just was poured right back into the con. When they started becoming money-making, profitable business, that changed the whole concept of the whole convention process. If you're running as a nonprofit and just churning it back in, and you're using all volunteers, totally different for something like a big Comic-Con where they're paid and they're it's staff, and you have taxes, and you have paperwork that has to be filled out and all of that.
One-Sided Die was asking a question about, and I know you guys kind of been talking about it in chat while we were off on another area.
You want to know what adventure is a good starter.
Well, the main question he had at first was better to have a pre-made adventure or wing it, and that's one I'll address, I think, the most, because I think that is an important one that I think a lot of people don't think about.
Is he specifically targeting a specific?
I think he's talking in general. He's talking. He's Shadowrun a bit, but just as in general thing, if you're showing up to if you've got a scheduled event at a Gencan't, at a convention, at a convention, which do you think works better, a pre-written adventure, or just winging the thing for the players?
Pre-made. Either you make it or publish like Stuffer Shack.
Definitely.
Having something in hand, because you're not going flailing about with, especially if you're letting them bring in their own characters. You have some kind of structure, even if it's just a pencil sketch.
I think what's interesting about the question that you wind up having different results. A lot of games are designed to pick up and play these days. So, like small one-shot games, like Fiasco, for example. It's kind of designed around presenting everything as less of a scenario and more of a bunch of improv scenes strung together by the rules.
Right. Well, and that's also one where the players have some input on what the adventure is going to be.
Yeah,
and
they're
stuff
basically
as well.
creating the scenario as they play it. And that's a very different experience than something like Shadowrun, where you have a lot of game balance and tactical mechanics that you have to kind of plan out ahead of time and kind of understand in order to really have a successful engagement with the players. So it's gonna be different based on what system you're running, but at the same time, the more prepared you are to run, the more familiar you are with the story you're telling and or the genre you're working in. You know, obviously the easier it's going to be, and practice refines everything. I've run the same, adventure to kind of teach people how to play Tian Sha for years now, and I don't need to look things up anymore, which is great. So I can focus on the players and keep the attention on them, as opposed to stalling and flipping through a book when I run into something that I haven't memorized. So that level of engagement with your players is going to benefit by preparation, and whether that preparation is using a store-bought adventure that you've read, reread, and kind of broken down based on how you want to run it, or something you've written yourself, doesn't really matter. What matters is that you've put in the practice to make sure that you can present them with the most streamlined version of your adventure that you can.
Yeah,
I think the thing that you're winging is related to them and their characters and their needs. The things that you're winging aren't also then related to the story, as you were just saying. Your friends, running something for your friends, you already know them. You already probably know or have an idea because you're there with their character creation. So those are not unknowns, and so then the story can be the unknown. Whereas if you've got strangers coming in with a character with whatever, that's where the unknown is going to be. So at least having the structure of a story, either store-bought or that you wrote, will help take. You'll still have a lot of flexibility, but you won't be going in 20 different directions at once.
It's also.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's also going to depend on the GM, on the game masters, because I've known some game masters that if you give them a pre-written adventure, they can run an amazing adventure as long as they've got a structure. They can go outside the lines, they can adjust things on the fly for the players, no problem. But they have to have that structure, whereas if they're just kind of winging it, and they have just the barest of outlines or no outline at all, they're going to sit there and fumble, and, when the players want to zig and they don't have any idea of what zigging means, then they stutter and stumble and have to look things up or stop and think. And conversely, I've known some GMs that when they have free reign, they're amazing, they're great at the improv, but when you hand them a script that they need to follow, basically with a pre-written adventure, they get real stiff because they start being afraid to go outside the lines. So when the players...
I was also, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, so when the players start going outside of the pre-written stuff, they don't know what to do then. Mm-hmm. So it's weird.
That I was saying, he was specifically focusing on teaching people Shadow or introducing people to the Shadowrun world.
Yeah.
So that there's that newbie aspect or new to Shadowrun aspect.
Yeah, if you're running,
that's what I'm saying is that extra layer of unknownness. How familiar are they with gaming? They're certainly not familiar with the world. So you're trying to also show them the world and the rules. It's definitely helpful. No matter your gaming, your GM style, it's helpful to have something.
Right.
One of the best things that one of the things that I look for when I'm looking at a pre-written adventure, and one of the things I try to encourage people to think about when they're writing their own adventures is to kind of think about, Marvel Comics used to have this approach to comic books where they would treat every issue as if it were going to be somebody's first issue of a comic. And kind of think about, even if you might be planning an adventure for experienced gamers, that might be their first time playing in that setting or playing with those rules. So it helps to have an adventure that is written in such a way that it introduces people to key fundamental elements of a setting and fundamental elements of the rules. So when I'm trying to run a game, I look for a set of rules that I want to highlight, and I kind of write around those to kind of give, at least the first encounter or two. to kind of go, okay, well, I want to highlight this cool thing that this system does. And so I'm going to write a scene where that's really useful, and that's going to be a spotlight event. And I want to highlight this really cool thing about the setting. So, and that kind of advice can be applied to just about virtually any role-playing game, not just Shadowrun. But I imagine that you guys, when you're teaching Shadowrun to new players, you're looking for those opportunities to explain the setting, to explain the rules, but not just in a out of character sense, but in an immersive sense where they're experiencing it during gameplay.
Exactly.
All right, so for everybody, we'll start at the top with Darcy. What's your favorite type of convention to go to? Since you've gone to several different styles, do you prefer large conventions, small conventions, gaming, anime, whatever?
I'll still always have the soft spot in my heart for Gencan't. I'll go back eventually.
We miss you. Although I also heartily endorse Origins.
Yes,
If
I went to Origins for several years.
Yeah.
Origins
Origins now is hitting about 20,000, a little over 20,000 people. So Origins is getting to about where Gencan't was when we started going.
When we first started, okay, nice. And like I said, from Asen and the others, I don't get into as much. I've become more introverted as I've gotten older. Except I'll work at the BattleTech pods and I'll go into Barker mode. I'll suddenly become the biggest extrovert and getting people in and getting people on. And don't be scared of that line when people are going in there in 10-minute batches. The line moves fast. All of that. So
yeah, I am.
Since most of my hobby's been in the gaming area, I've still said that'd be my favorite.
Yeah, I'm weird as far as being, because I used to not be an introvert. I used to be pretty extroverted. But again, as I've gotten older, I've definitely and as my brain has started eating itself, I've found that I'm much more introverted than I used to be. But so like if I like went out to like a bar or just any place with just a general social gathering, I'm the guy who will sit in the corner and not really talk to anybody. But you get me at a convention, and everybody is my best friend, and I am loud and I am probably really obnoxious, and I am outgoing. Well, I love my people. I love being around gamers. So, and
you also have the thing when we're at those conventions, it's not just that everybody's your friend; it's that literally lots of people that know you that you know.
Well, okay, that's true
so
too.
You're in that comfort level.
That is
so
true
you're
too.
In a crowd, it's a familiar crowd.
There is too, but that's just a matter of having gone for so many years now and being so open and extroverted there.
One of the things that my convention face is different as well, but it's basically a matter of when I'm at a convention, I have a job to do, and that makes it a lot easier to structure every interaction in a way that puts me in control. And I think that makes it a lot easier to be extroverted if you're an introvert by nature, is that you're in a familiar venue, performing familiar routines. You're basically there. Like when you're a barker for the BattleTech pods, you have a job to do, and once you know your role and what kind of interactions you can expect to have with people, you being the speaker puts you in charge of every interaction and gives you a chance to kind of take control, and that means you're risking less than you would at, say, like a party where you're meeting a bunch of people from like an extended family member's friend circle that you've never heard of before. It's a lot more intimidating when you don't like have that kind of authority in the moment.
Well,
exactly.
and you don't have any.
Well,
you don't necessarily have a baseline of interests either.
Someone walking up to the pods with this quizzical look on their face, that's an invitation to go, yes, there are people playing a game in those things. Yeah.
However, I will recommend, unless somebody asks you to, don't go up and just start telling somebody about your character.
Oh no, GMs love that.
Don't even joke.
It's so funny because there are some people who really do this eye-rolling thing and this fatigue thing where it's like, oh god, just tell me about your character sarcastically. But generally speaking, when I'm talking to people and they start, talking about their character, I've because I started off doing art, it was a lot of, I need to learn this because this is what they want to see when I draw their character for them, because that's what I was doing for a lot of these people. So I got in the habit of listening and learning to listen to these stories that other people are telling, and kind of listening past the minutia of I did this and this and this, and actually listening to the enthusiasm that they have for that character. And that's kind of a really infectious thing if you can get past the kind of, banal, oh, I've heard this part before because I've seen, we played that adventure, I've been through, I've been gaming since the 1970s. Nothing this person can say will surprise me. It's like, well, no, but you still have an opportunity to share enthusiasm. And it's like, and if you can especially if you can coach someone through your dialogue, through your interchange to kind of pull back on the details and not worry about the details, but just kind of tell me about the story of their character. Like, who is their character? Why are they motivated? What makes them fun to play? What, those kind of things. You can usually share, a lot of fun, conversations with people like that. But it's a lot of people, when they're telling that story about their character, they don't know how to do that, and they need to they need guidance. And what I can tell people is, if you want to encourage people, if you want to talk to somebody about their character, first of all, relate it to them somehow. Find a way that your character matters to them. Like if somebody comes up and starts telling me about their Dungeons and Dragons character, my interest level is pretty low because I don't play D&D on a regular basis. But if they start coming in and tell me about the character that they played when they were in a Mutants and Masterminds game, and they ran up against, Six Gun, which is a group of, blatant plug, a book we publish, and they ran into these, and they tell me the story of how they dealt with, this cybernetic, military team that they had to go up against. I'm a lot more engaged and a lot more likely to be engaged. If you can tailor your story to your audience, you're basically doing the job of a DM. And if you can tell, if you can think like a DM when you're talking about your character, I think you'll find that a lot of people will be more receptive to listening to your story.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And like I said off the bat, it all depends on, whether they're receptive or not. Because a lot of times people will come up and they'll start trying to tell you about their character while you're in the middle of working at the booth or something like that, and you've got other customers and you're trying to do multiple things. And and honestly, for me, it's less a matter of, oh, I don't want to hear about your character, and more of, I don't have 10 to 15 minutes to spend listening to you, as much as that sucks.
Yeah, that's
so it's an issue of time and place and stuff.
It's very easy to get into the mindset too. It's like, is this a sale or not? Like when somebody walks up to your booth, it's easy to get stuck in that idea. And for me, one of the things that kind of benefited me over the long run is kind of gauging whether a conversation was a sale or not right away. So I didn't have to worry about trying to upsell them or just figure out how to turn something into a sale, but just kind of like look at it as a conversation that I could have while I was waiting for a sale to come up. And if there was a line, I would say, excuse me, I think this person is trying to get some help, and I'll be right back with you. And that, having that authority again lets you kind of take control of the conversation. If you're if you learn how to exert that authority gently, it's usually not as
if I'm just hanging around,
you don't want to be too condescending to people.
No.
You're there to engage. That's kind of the point.
I mean, if I'm just kind of hanging out or whatever and somebody wants to chat with me, that's cool. I don't mind doing that, and I will listen to them. And sometimes it's really awesome, and sometimes they ramble a bit. And I know I'm awful too. I am not a very good storyteller. I am okay with talking in a setting like this, and I'm okay as a writer. But if I'm just trying to explain, like if I'm trying to tell you about my character, it's just boring as hell. Because I will just ramble and go off on tangents and...
Dude, I can't imagine that. People are wearing, your character's logo on their T-shirts at Gencan't right now. I don't think that's like Landros just said. That's lies and slander.
Well, okay, part of it is also my imposter syndrome, probably speaking. Because God knows, imposter syndrome hates me. I want to answer I'm gonna take a quick Shadowrun Ant question here, because Yaz had asked a little bit ago about running games dark or dystopian, or as runners bringing hope. Because I know that's something that's been an issue with Shadowrun is what direction does the game go, and and everything. And like I said, we talked about it a bit last night. And let me post that again. Oh, that's not it. All right, I'll post the YouTube video here in a little bit for you, the link. But if you go listen in on there, somewhere in there we talk about that. But yeah, generally the game is. It used to be a lot more of like the runners versus the corporations, and the runners had a false hope, at least, that they could make a difference in the world. And as the editions went on, the game sort of evolved a little bit towards where the characters were a little bit more mercenary. It was less of a game about underdogs sticking it to the corpse, the man, and more about mercenaries making a buck. And there's no
less Dragon Age, more Skyrim.
Yeah, there's no wrong way to play Shadowrun. Shadowrun is there's a lot of variables to Shadowrun, and there is not a wrong way to play Shadowrun. But the focus shifts as different people are involved and as the fan base has evolved. I know we have a book coming up called I believe it's Better Than Bad. There's a book.
Tell Reddit.
There's a book coming up called Better Than Bad that's about hooders, basically, what they call hooders or, white knights. It's about characters who are shadowrunning to try to make the world a little bit better. Hey, I have a Brony edition of Shadowrun 5, so don't laugh.
So I actually have a question about this.
Sure.
Someone who hasn't kind of been in touch with Shadowrun in a long time. One of the things that is the hallmark of cyberpunk, and this is kind of like a rambling story that can lead into a question, but basically, my observations of Shadowrun versus cyberpunk have kind of been an interesting topic lately. The world of most cyberpunk worlds is designed to kind of educate or illuminate the reader as to the problem of what happens when corporations, are in charge, and where, you have this disparity of wealth and this growing divide between the wealthy and the poor. And what was always interesting was that a lot of people who get interested in cyberpunk do so through the more kind of action-oriented and fantasy-oriented elements of cyberpunk, like the movies like Ghost in the Shell, where you have these really cool action heroes, or you have this kind of mashup of genres in Shadowrun, where you have magic and technology, and so and it's very player-focused, where you have kind of the goals of a character in mind, and you're focused on the goals of that character, and you kind of have this sort of myopic look into the setting sometimes, I think, where you're more focused on what your character's goals are, so you don't really see any more kind of the larger social message of cyberpunk. And what's interesting to me is a lot of people, for them, that is the baseline of cyberpunk, is that kind of adventure and excitement, as opposed to the horror and social
yeah,
destruction of social order that actually is what cyberpunk as a genre was meant to reflect. And so for you, I know what I use cyberpunk for in my games, but I'm kind of curious, it's like, to you, it's like, do you feel like that does a disservice on any level to the genre or to the fans to kind of embrace that sort of character-focused approach to the genre, or do you think that Shadowrun still cyberpunk, or is it something completely different now?
I would say it's not cyberpunk anymore.
It still is some, and we keep trying to inject more cyberpunk into it. And I know there's a couple of books coming up that are, like I said, the Better Than Bad, the Hooder book that I'm talking about, will touch on some of that. There's another book that we've got in the pipeline that I can't talk about that hopefully will touch on a little bit of that. That is something I know a lot of us would like to put into the game. The problem basically comes down to players like guns. Players like toys. Players like action movies. So we try to put that stuff into like the fiction, into the stories, and into the world as part of the background. But it's hard to push it to the forefront because that's not what sells the books. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as much as we may want to think otherwise, we are the megacorps. We're in a business to make money, and we have to put out books that are going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough. There's a lot of stuff that I would really like to see more of in Shadowrun, and yeah, the whole idea of that the corporate dystopia and how oppressive it is, and how that affects the daily people, and because that's why Shadowrunners. I mean, that's honestly was originally why Shadowrunners are Shadowrunners, is because of how the world is.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Hood.
Yeah, well, they're forced into it because they can't conform to, or they can't accept the soul-crushing disparity of the world, one way or another.
Yeah. Outside of the game, the meta of magic being introduced was because someone wanted elves in the game. It was going to be a cyberpunk.
Well, it was going to be cyberpunk. Well, it was going to.
Somebody wanted elves.
Well, it wasn't even so much that somebody wanted elves; as it was that Pondsmith beat us to the market.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk 2020 was published before Shadowrun got out the door, so then they kind of had to.
Different.
So then Jordan Wiseman had to find something to differentiate it.
Yeah. But within the game, the introduction of magic helped bring that hope into the world, like stuff that happened with the Great Ghost Dance and whatnot. The fact that yes, it can heal itself. Yes, we can take some of the power, literal and metaphorical, back.
Oh, Eric, I agree. I love the magic and the elves and the dragons. It's one of the things that sold me on the game. I like the idea of cyberpunk, but it never really appealed to me the way Shadowrun did, because I like that. It's probably also why I like Star Wars over Star Trek, is I like the science fantasy as opposed to just straight science fiction. So, anyways, we're way off of the topic of conventions, and we're hitting close to the 2.5 hour mark. So, why don't we say 9 more minutes, and we'll wrap it up at 10:30.
All right.
Okay.
So, does anybody else have any questions about conventions? And
here's a question for you, Bull.
All right.
Since you've been going to gaming conventions longer than I have, and actually, you know what? Let me pitch this to anyone who wants to answer this. But how have conventions changed the way you game at home?
That is a good question. Unfortunately, I don't game much anymore. At all. I don't have a game group because I'm kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So unfortunately, gaming at conventions, and I barely do any of that, is all I get to do. Mm-hmm. Before that, though, I think it helped me because I kind of got dumped into GMing right away. I went to one Gencan't where I got to play. The year after that, I went to Origins, and I had been recruited by FASA to run the old Shadowrun trading card game, a tournament for the trading card game. And they were short of GMs for their tournament at that convention, and I got roped into helping. And then at Gencan't, I got roped into GMing with Jeff and Rich and them. And then the next year I got put in charge of running stuff at Origins for FASA. Helped out with Rich and them for a couple more years, and then gotten put in charge at Gencan't as well. And kind of ended up doing it ever since. I've only had a couple of conventions where I have not had to work the show. So my experience as GMing at conventions, I think, helped me as a game master overall. Because I got because it's really easy to get into a rut when you're playing with the same group of players all the time, because you know their habits, they know your habits, and it's really easy to just do the same stuff all the time. Being exposed to a bunch of new people and a bunch of different play styles and a bunch of different personalities, like you do when you're thrown into groups of random tables of random players, you're forced to think a little bit more, and it gives you a wider perspective on how people play, and being exposed to a bunch of new GMs gave you a wider perspective on how people run games. And I was able to, over the years, I was able to pick up tips and tricks from them and apply them to my home games.
Anybody else want to pick up that question, or have we got any questions from the chat room yet? Let's see.
Apparently not.
That's why I threw that question out there, because I figured it would be better than just waiting for someone.
You fry everybody's brains full.
What's Darcy? Did conventions change the way you game at home at all?
It went the other way around for me. This is odd because I wasn't running a game. When I switched over and I was running at the conventions, I was not the GM at home.
Mm-hmm.
So it helped as a player to an extent of, being back on the other side of reminding myself of what the GM goes through.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also, the bigger thing that I was missing that helped was, I was somewhat involved in a LARP, and I'm not a LARPer. I'm not a LARPer at all, but a bunch of my friends were, and so I was involved in a LARP once a month, and that helped my GM skills phenomenally because of the improv aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So, but definitely being able to, seeing ways of working out conflict, which is easy enough to do when you're already friends with people in the home game, but seeing conflict between players, between groups, and bringing those skills back helped a little.
Cool.
All right,
I haven't done any LARPing yet at all, so that's completely new to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw this out real quick.
But it is fun.
I'll throw a question out for everybody real quick, and if you can answer it in just a couple of minutes, what is your single best experience at a convention, gaming or otherwise? Let's start with Jeff. Or we could start with someone else.
No. I have a story. I feel like it's going to be name dropping, but it was great. I helped some friends run this little con called Pariah Con in Lakeland, Florida. It was about 250, 300 people. But Lakeland, Florida is where George Lowe lives. He's the voice of Space Ghost, if you're not familiar with him.
Okay.
So we were running the convention, and myself and Brett Weaver, who's a voice actor, went over to George's house to pick him up. And he lives in this old, rustic Frank Lloyd Wright house in Lakeland that's just full of this vintage 60s Eames chair type furniture. It's gorgeous. And I totally just got to hang out with Space Ghost for a couple of hours, sitting in his house, drinking rum and cokes and talking about all kinds of crazy shit.
That is awesome. Darcy.
I'll give you most memorable for public consumption.
Probably for the best.
Talk about drinking. Yes. And Jeff will actually remember this from the other side, because this was from, it was the first or second year playing with the group of us that became a team of players at the convention, at the tournament, that
I know
before, you know what I'm going to talk about. We went and hit the mall on the Saturday before the finals, and we bought props that we showed up with. So we were acting out and got to eating meals and everything that weekend together. So there's the key. We talked about earlier about it's easy. Win a tournament and get invited. That's the way to win a tournament.
Nice.
Become a team with your players. If you're thrown in with random players at the beginning of a tournament if you don't already have a set of 6 people together. Or 8 people now.
They totally bonded, and the group was awesome.
Awesome.
I still have my roadkill license plate propped up on the bookcase.
James.
Man, I was trying to find one. So many stories. It's weird because my stories have evolved at the different circles I've been a participant in. Like, back in my Artist Alley days, getting to hang out with like Fred Perry at a party and like trading sketches with artists. There were so many like great times back then. But recently, a good time being able to sit down at a gaming table with like T.S. Leukart and John Lighthouser and a couple of other people and running my teaching game of Tian Sha for those guys, and just being able to meet people that I've already worked with, but in a more social environment is kind of like my thing. What's great for me about conventions is I meet a lot of these people online through mutual connections and whatnot, and I've established these working relationships, but getting to meet them in person is a lot of fun for me. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I mean, I tell a bunch of weird anecdotes just about circumstantial stuff, like Japanese guests coming to America and not really getting the cultural differences. It's like not understanding personal space the same way Americans do. Like there was a Japanese guest who in Japan, she was famous for having large breasts, and she came to America and was hanging out with they had one of the women kind of acting as her chaperone, and they got into an argument about cup sizes in bras. And the funny thing was, it turns out that cup sizes in Japan are listed in a more flattering way, so they have a higher letter count in America for the same size person. And so there was this funny argument about how big this person should be, and that was kind of a funny thing. But again, these days, just being able to point to people like getting to a convention and having someone, Chris Pramus or Nicole Lindrus or anyone like that remember who I am is kind of a fun thing. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like now I work for them, so they better remember who I am. I send them an invoice every once in a while.
Who are you again?
But it's like that kind of breakthrough of going, it was like I'm kind of going to gaming conventions is like a square one for me. So I'm just now getting to the good stories, if that makes any sense. I'm like just starting to get into kind of the circles where I'm learning, where people like I'm able to work with people like Robin Laws and things like that, and like those moments are really special for me. But it's also a moment, there's also kind of a business element that always has my anxiety going in the background, trying to say, make sure you get this right. I don't get to hang out and just the way I did back at the anime convention, so I don't get the fun, weird, bizarre people with their hair down stories.
I think my favorite convention experience had to be second or third year GMing. I don't remember, at Gencan't. There was an Earth Dawn tournament we were running at FASA, and when I got to and there was a GM that had an emergency and had to no-show the convention at the very last minute. So they needed somebody to cover the first round of the Earth Dawn tournament. And I was like the only one that had a free slot that available. So they asked me to run it. I had only ever made a character for Earth Dawn at this point. I had never played Earth Dawn. I was vaguely familiar with it, but I didn't know a whole lot about the game. So I get stuck running this tournament. And I'm like, all right, cool, I'll do it. I sit down at the table, and at the table is Sherry Prosperi, who is the wife of Lou Prosperi. Lou was the line developer for Earth Dawn at the time. There was another guy named Drew. Drew was head of Threads of Legend at the time, which was the RPGA Earth Dawn game line. There was a couple of other players that they happened to casually mention that they were really good friends with with the guys at FASA, and the one girl even points out that one of the characters in the Earth Dawn book was sketched based on her. And so I'm panicking because I have no idea. I'm like, oh god, I don't know this game, and I've got all these people who obviously know what's going on and their names. And I'm like, shit. So, but I ended up running it, and I just kind of I focused on telling a good story and letting them play. And there was a reoccurring thing where they had to make a perception check, and as a kind of running joke, I ended up throwing this raccoon in that they kept seeing whenever somebody rolled really well for a perception check, and it sort of became the table's mascot. And the players they all knew I was nervous about running the game. And apparently I did a really good job. So by the end of they ended up winning the tournament overall. And at the awards ceremony on the last day, they actually came up to me and they presented me with a Beanie Baby raccoon that they had chipped in and purchased as sort of a little thing for me to basically say that they had a lot of fun. They knew I was nervous, and I thought that was amazing. So that was one of my better convention experiences. It wasn't a Shadowrun experience, go figure. But being able to pull that off was a proud moment of mine, and it's a story that I've carried with me ever since. Because anytime I have a GM that's nervous, they're like, I don't know if I can do a good job. I'll tell them that story and basically like focus on telling a story, focus on the players having fun, and things will go well. Because the players are there to have fun, so they're forgiving, which is nice. But all right, does anybody have any last things they want to say before we wrap things up?
Does anybody else have stuff they need to plug? I don't want to be the only person.
Not really.
Plug away.
Okay. Well, just if you're interested in superheroes or wuxia or kung fu stuff. Again, check out check out Vigilance Press's website, www.vigilance.com. We are not a right-wing crazy group of people. We are the name comes from the first role-playing game that Chuck wrote and published under that banner, which was a superhero role-playing game. So the Vigilance is a superhero tag, but we are now publishing stuff for the Fate Core role-playing system in wuxia. So we're also doing we've also got a lot of products for Mutants and Masterminds, several editions, but all the stuff I've published is for 3rd edition in terms of the stuff that I've done since I took over the company. We've also got some old school role-playing game stuff in there. So if anybody's interested, you can check us out on Drive-Thru RPG Now, or head to our website, and there's a catalog page where you can find links to the categories on. I think Drive-Thru RPG is our default kind of where we're sending people.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank all my thank my panelists here for coming out to Gencan't, the unconvention for all of us not fortunate enough to be at Gen Con this year.
Thanks for having me.
I want to say a big thanks to everybody who showed up to be part of the audience. We appreciate it. I'm glad we had a halfway decent turnout for this. I was recording, so I will get this all crunched up and posted probably tomorrow because my internet's pig slow. My upload speed sucks. So I will get this up at some point, though. So if anybody came in late or whatever, you can listen into the beginning parts of it. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully it was entertaining. I had a lot of fun, so thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bull.
Thank you. Thanks for the host.
Thanks. Well.
All right, and we're out.